Have you ever gone to a stadium or a theater and wondered what it would have been like to be drowned in the adoration of thousands of spectators? Well, today we're going to visit a place where you get to do exactly that. And as a bonus, all the spectators are wearing togas. Before we meet our adoring crowd, we're going to talk about a couple of things that we're not going to talk about. That made more sense in my head, but whatever. One, while we are talking about the Greek Olympics, we are not talking about these Greek Olympics or these Greek Olympics. Both were pretty historic in their own right, but have way too much to live up to. Secondly, I want to make sure we know that the Olympic Games did not take place at Mount Olympus. They took place in the Peloponnese at a place called Ancient Olympia. Well, I assume it probably wasn't called Ancient Olympia back before it was ancient. Okay, so here's the part in the video where I try to set up the establishment shots. It would be great if I had a drone or a satellite image, but I don't have either. So we're going to go old school for a second and look at two images. This one here is a model of what Ancient Olympia looked like about 2,500 years ago, to give you some idea of the size of the site that we're talking about. Secondly, this image here is from the mid-20th century, but it really hasn't changed a whole lot to today. So I hope that that's helpful too in setting up sort of an overview of what the site looks like. Okay, so a little bit of background on the history of Olympia here in the Peloponnese. The Olympic Games started here right around 776 BC and ran more or less for about 1,000 years at this site. While that was fairly constant through the years, the outside world was not, and so the context of the games changed over time. You can imagine that the games would look different with a small ancient Greek, classical Greek city-state versus a larger, more Greek nation, on through to a more Roman Christian era games, especially when they were first set up as a devotion to Zeus. So while the games remain fairly constant, the context that they took place in changed drastically over those 1,000 years. But as I said in my last episode in Delphi, I'm not really a historian, and certainly not a Greek historian, and so I'm not comfortable talking too deeply about the historical facts of Olympia. What I am comfortable talking about is what it's like to be in the space, what it's like to experience Ancient Olympia today. It's pretty overwhelming in a few regards, but not in the same way that Delphi was. Delphi was more intimidating and dramatic, I guess. This is more of maybe it was just a day, but this feels more comfortable. You walk through the museum, and the museum has just an astonishing level of artifacts that kind of tell a story of through the years. I remember seeing one of a bunch of figurines. I'll put it on the screen now. That kind of gave you could almost picture the fingers that were holding and molding these figurines. And there's so much here. This shot here is of the side porch. It's almost like a loading area, and I think most museums would absolutely love to have any one of these pieces in their collection, and they're sitting on the back porch. And so in that regard, it's very, it carries some weight. The site carries some weight, but without being overwhelming. As you step outside and you walk amongst the ruins, it really feels, honestly, it just feels cool. I wish there was a better word for it, but it feels cool to walk amongst the ruins. You can listen and try to pretend that you hear cheers and worship and festivals and ceremonies. I'm not saying that you can, but at the same time, it's not that difficult to imagine what this site was like when it was being used, in spite of the fact that the ruins are pretty total. There's very few columns left standing. There's very few buildings that even remotely resemble what they look like in their former glory. I do want to talk very briefly about the actual games themselves. I'm not naive. I know that for their era, the Olympic Games here were a spectacle. It was a big showing. It was a festival. It was a way to celebrate what it was to be an Olympian. But I think there was a purity to it too that we're lacking today. I don't want to get too deep again, but I don't imagine that there were McDonald's logos on the start and finish lines. I don't imagine that Home Depot sponsored this temple, and I don't imagine that anybody would have stood for something like that. I see the Olympics as a festival that shows what humanity can do, and I think that's really, at its core, what the ancient Olympics were about. So finally, I would just like to thank the Greek people and UNESCO for protecting this site. I really do appreciate it, and I look forward to going back because there's a lot that I didn't get to see. Okay, for next week's video, we're going to go 4,700 miles to the northwest. We're going to exchange sandals and togas for galoshes and probably unnecessary swimsuits. If you have any idea where we're going, which you probably don't because that's a pretty weak clue, please feel free to leave it in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you haven't already, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. In the end, though, I just hope that you remember to be kind and keep exploring.